Hey everyone, I'm Marbozir and welcome to Kerbal Space Disaster, or Kerbal Rage Program, or Kerbal Space Program. That's basically all the same thing, so it's easy to make a mistake. So, what is this game? This is one of the most unique games I've ever played. It's still in heavy development as of February 2014. It was originally released with sandbox mode only, but as of October 2013, it has a career mode, where you basically run your own space program, you research new technologies, and you try to achieve bigger and greater things. That's the shortest version possible. So I will be playing the career mode. Now I'm starting this game without any mods, but there are a lot of mods available for the game. I will be talking about that much later, at least a few parts into this series. I don't know how long this series is going to be, but the first few parts are going to cover the basics. How to actually do anything in the game and how to actually play it in the first place, because this game has a rather steep learning curve, but it's an incredibly addictive game. Once you get into it and once you start understanding how things work, it's pretty damn hard to stop playing it. So I'm going to start a new game. Alright, I had to turn off my Steam overlay. So, I'm going to start career mode, and as I was saying, the game originally released with sandbox mode only. I won't be playing that. Career mode was added in 0.22. This is version 0.23 that I'm playing right now, which you can see in the bottom right corner. So, let's get started. You can pick your flag. There are a bunch of different flags available. I'm okay with the default one, or we can pick something more interesting, I suppose. Let's see, yeah, trees. Kerbal moon flag. Yeah, that's fine. So, let's get started. Alright, so, when you first start the game, you start in your space center on Kerbal. Kerbal is our home planet, in this case. There are a few different buildings that serve different purposes. So, we have our tracking station. This is Kerbal right here. Kerbal has two moons. The first one is going to be one of the first destinations, but the very first goal is actually getting some science and being able to get into orbit. And more advanced things come much later in the game. These are all the planets that you can actually get to. These are equivalents of actual real planets. They are just called differently. So this is Duna, for example. This is Eve. We got Joel, we got Ilo. So let's get back to the space center. There's also the research and development building, which won't have a whole lot right now. This is the start of our technology tree. You only start with a handful of different parts unlocked. These are the parts that are unlocked at the start of the game. Not a lot. And you have to unlock all the other technologies. You do that by getting science. We'll get into that once we actually start doing something. So, let's build a rocket. In this case, it's not going to be much of a rocket, really. As an interesting note, you can actually start getting science without even launching anything. If I grab my command pod, which is required, no matter what you do, unless you launch a probe. Obviously, right now I don't actually have access to probes, but every ship needs to have a command pod. So that's our command pod. I can actually launch it, quote unquote. Obviously it doesn't have any fuel or engines, so I won't be actually launching it. However, I can do science on the actual launch pad. So here we are on the launch pad. First of all, I can do crew report, which will give me a little bit of science. 1.5 science in this case. I can transmit it back home. I am already home, so there's no real point doing that. This will give me 100% science value, and it will give me science immediately. The main purpose of actually doing this is in cases where you want to send science back home, if you don't know that you will actually be able to get back home in the first place. So you can transmit science back home without having to come back home. If you're not able to land back on Kerbal when coming back from anywhere really, you will not get any science that's on your ship. So this is one way of getting around that. I will keep that data. I will actually get outside of my command pod, which you do by pressing this button down here, EVA, which basically means spacewalk, or in this case, walking on the launch pad. So I can do more science outside of the actual command pod. Now this is a little bit funny, because right now I'm actually considered to be flying over Kerbin. So I can actually do EVA report from the launch pad. Hold on. Let's do it again. This should work. There we go. EVA report while flying over Kerbin's shores. So I'll grab this data. Now I'm going to get back outside again. I can let go. Now I can grab EVA report walking on the actual launch pad, which will give me even more science. I can also take a surface sample, which will give me even more science. I could plant a flag, but there's no real reason to do that. So I won't be doing that. Now I'll get back in the pod. And I think that's all science I can collect. However, I can actually move this thing around. If I move far enough, I can get to other biomes. Because every planet, or, well, maybe not every planet, but most planets have different biomes. And you can do EVA reports in every single biome, and you will get science separately for all of that. This is not exactly the most optimal way of doing things, but you can technically get to other biomes like this without even having to launch anything. Yeah, this is the space program rolling around in command pod. That's the first quote-unquote space expedition. This is probably still the same exact biome, but if I get to the grass, that might be considered to be a grassland, although I'm not sure about that. But again, this is not exactly the most optimal way of doing things. I can just get out of here. Yeah, now hatch is obstructed, so you can't actually leave the command pod like that. Alright, let's leave for a second. And go here. Yeah, this is the space exploration in Kerbal Space Program. Exploring 2 meters away from the space center. Alright, let's see if we can get science from the surface sample. We definitely can. And I get more science. EVA report from KSC. Yep. That's the Kerbal Space Center. I think this is going to be enough science to unlock at least the first technology easily. It's a good idea to grab that first technology before you really start building anything, because it gives you quite a few really useful parts. So now, once you're actually down on Kerbin, which we obviously are, we never left, you can go up here and click Recover Vessel. This will give you all the science that was stored inside the command pod. So in this case, we got 34.9 science from this mission. And we have a total of 34 science to spend. And we didn't even launch anything. So now I can unlock the first technology. There's no choice right here. This will cost me 5. And I have 3 new. I actually have enough science to unlock one of them. So there are 3 options here. I can unlock general rocketry, which will give me access to a better engine. This is one of the better early game engines, the T-45. It has 200 max thrust. There are a lot of numbers involved here. You don't really have to understand most of them, but in case of engines, thrust is the most important one, more or less. There's another engine right here. This one has 50 thrust, but this is much better for the final stage. So for actually flying around in space, for maneuvering in space in this case. I don't really need stability right now, but radial decoupler can be quite useful. However, we already have a decoupler from this technology. This is what separates stages. I'll get into that once we actually start building something. So I think I'll grab general rocketry. That's going to be a little bit more useful. I can get my landing struts a little bit later. There is a radial mount parachute, but I already have a parachute. I won't need the radial mounted one just yet. Okay, let's grab general rocketry. That leaves me with 9 science. We'll get the other 2 technologies quite easily. So now, let's actually build anything or something that can actually fly. We will start from the command pod, obviously. Now, if I want to actually land safely, I'm going to need a parachute. There are various different categories of parts. So we have the pods. Right now, there's only one pod, obviously. As I said before, you need to actually have a pod to build anything at all, unless you use a probe. We have propulsion, which are mostly boosters, engines, and fuel tanks. You can use the solid fuel booster, which basically burns until it runs out of fuel. You can't shut it down. So this is only good for actually getting off the planet, because once you're in orbit, you want to shut down the engines, and you can't do that with solid fuel booster. This is also a solid fuel booster, so I can use this. We have the fuel tanks, 3 different ones. So this one has 90 fuel and looks like this. This one has 45 fuel. This is pretty good for the final stage. And this one has 220. I can use these with liquid fuel engines. So we also have control, which right now has nothing because I don't have the technologies. We have structural. And the most important thing in here right now is the stack decoupler. This is what allows you to build multi-stage rockets. So if I attach it to this will separate this stage. I will attach the parachute. So aerodynamic, there's nothing in here. I would have wings and things like that once I have the technology required. We got utility, which right now is just the parachute. I'll attach the parachute on top. We need that to actually be able to land safely at all. And we have science. This is what allows you to get more science. So right now I have that communotron, which is what will allow me to send science back home from space. I can transmit data back home if I bring this with me. So I can grab 2 of those. Now I usually grab 2 of those because if you transmit multiple things at a time, you sometimes lose some science. It's apparently a bug. It's usually a good idea to just use 2 of them. They are very light. You can see the mass is 0.005. So it's not really a big deal. The mystery goo container is also one of the items that allows you to get more science. This is actually the first item that allows you to get more science. You can do experiments with this. Now, I could attach it to my pod, but I can also add another element under the stack decoupler and keep it there. Then I can grab the science from that and store it in the command module. Because if you actually add the mystery goo containment or any other modules that are used for experiments, so let's say I do something like this. I add the fuel tank and then I attach the mystery goo container to this. Now, if I drop this stage and then land with the command pod only, I will not get the science from the mystery goo container unless I get outside of the command pod with EVA, then actually grab the science from the mystery goo container, which means I have to get close enough and then get back into the command pod, store the data in the actual command pod. Then you can keep it. I like to just bring the mystery goo container with me with the final stage, at least early in the game. Later in the game it's not such a good idea, but it's not really a big deal at the start. So I'm just going to do it like this. I would probably be fine with just one. I'm not going to make this too complicated. But all you need to know is that this is extra science, which I'm going to show you once we actually launch this thing. So we have the parachute, we have the comms, we have the mystery goo container. We don't really need the comms because I plan to actually land with this thing. Now we need to actually launch it. So I'm going to keep it simple and just use the fuel booster. This is the first fuel booster you get from the first technology, I believe. So I can just do something like this. And this is actually going to start just fine. It won't go very far, but I will be able to get some science. So let's actually launch it. You can also name your ship. I didn't do it right now. So this is going to be called Untitled Spacecraft. As you can see. So before you actually launch anything, you should turn off SAS, which is basically Stability Augmentation System. I think that's what it's called exactly. And what it means is that it's easier to control your rocket. It's more stable. This is a stabilization system basically. You should always turn this on before you start. You can do this by pressing the T key. And you should also throttle up before you start. You can throttle up or down with Shift and Control. As you can see right here, this is what I'm doing. So I turn off SAS. I throttle up to 100%. And you actually start by pressing spacebar, which will activate the first stage. So this will actually fire the engines. Once I press the spacebar again, this will drop the solid fuel tank and activate the parachute. Actually, I should fix this a little bit. I will get back into the assembly and change this. I do not want the decoupler to fire in the same stage as the parachute. So I'm going to move this. This is the decoupler. I'm going to move it down here. Like this. In fact, I can do it like that. So first I'm going to fire the engine, then I'm going to drop this, and then I'll use the parachute. So technically that's 3 stages, but in reality these are 2 stages really. The parachute is the last thing you want to use. You definitely don't want to use it when you don't have to, because it's not reusable. Once you fire the parachute, that's it. So, let's start. You start by pressing the spacebar, and off we go. Right now what I'm going to do is just go straight up. I can already do some science. So I can observe the mystery go, which is going to give me some science. If I go high enough, I will be able to do this experiment again, because once you do an experiment, you can't actually get science from that experiment again, or you will get very little science for it. If I got over a different biome, I could get more science, and as you can see now, we ran out of fuel. Now I can actually drop this stage by pressing spacebar. So I dropped it thanks to the decoupler, and if I press spacebar again, I'm going to release the parachute. That's what it's going to do. I could do it right now, I'm just going to wait until I start falling. Now, you don't have to actually wait for this. You can accelerate time by pressing the greater than and lesser than, or if you prefer, the period and comma on the keyboard. So you can accelerate only to ×4 if you're in the atmosphere, basically. But you can accelerate up to 100,000 if you're in deep space. So now I'm going to release parachute, few kilometers above the ground. Speed this up again. I'll slow down to 1 before I actually land, because, well, you can crash more easily if you land while accelerating. The physics only work really well if you're not accelerating time at all. And yeah, I actually crashed because I was going down too fast. So this was not exactly successful. But now, because I crashed and I didn't actually transmit any of the data back home, I actually lost all that science. Now I can revert back to launch and do this again. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. We are going to do science right away. So we will observe the mystery go. I can observe the mystery go on the launch pad, so I can do that later. Store this, do the crew report. I'll take the crew report. And we'll do this again. I will speed this up a little bit. Wait until I run out of fuel. Now, as you could see for a moment, the engine can actually overheat. When I'm back in the assembly area, I can actually limit the thrust of the engine. Or I can just thrust down if I don't want it to overheat. If it overheats, it's going to explode, and now I'm spinning out of control because I didn't activate SAS. Now it's fine. So I'm going to wait until I start going down, release the parachute a little bit higher this time around, and slow down to ×1 early enough. So now I will release the parachute. And now we will just wait a little bit. Speed this up again. It should be fine this time. Nope, yeah, I was using time warp. Yeah, this is exactly what I was talking about. So I was a little bit impatient. This is not what you should be doing. If you're actually landing, it's best to just keep time at ×1. Do not use time warp at all. Let's do this one more time. I got a little bit impatient there. Let's do it again. Observe the mystery go. That will give me science. Do the crew report. That will give me more science. I could observe the second mystery go, and I suppose I should, because I won't really get high enough to get extra science from it, but this will give me very little science. Let's reset this for a moment and use it as high as possible. But I don't think I will be high enough to get extra science from this. Alright. So use this again. I'm going to time warp until I use the parachute. That's how it's going to work. And then I'll wait on ×1. Down we go. I usually use the parachute below 10 kilometers or something like that. But it doesn't matter all that much. And now I'm just going to wait. I can speed it up a little bit until I'm at around 3 kilometers. But then I'll use ×1. This should be a little bit better this time. I could use multiple parachutes once I unlock the radial parachute, and it's usually a good idea to do that, especially if your final stage is much bigger than that. Then one parachute wouldn't really hold that. If my final stage that I'm landing with was 4 times bigger, then one parachute would definitely not be enough. And in that case, you want the radial ones, which I don't actually have one. There's the parachute, so now I'm actually going to land properly. I can speed it up a little bit now. And slow it down to 1 right before I hit the ground. That's usually the best way. So now I will slow down to 1. I don't think I can get any more science in here. Actually, if I get out, I might be able to get EVA. And we landed. So can we get science from EVA report? Probably not, but let's have a look. This is not the launch pad, so I should be able to take surface sample and get science from that or not. EVA report. Nope, I won't get any science from this. I should get a tiny little bit from this. So every little bit helps. Let's get back in and recover. So this should give me a good bit of science. I have 25 total. We got 15 earned on this mission. And as you can see, the first mystery goo container, observation while flying at Kerbal, gave me 10 data gathered and 7 science for that. But the second observation gave me also 10 data gathered, but only 1.6 science. You only get full science for the first observation, but you can do a lot of observations even above Kerbal. You can do it over the grasslands, you can do it over the desert, you can do it over the mountains, highlands. So you can get quite a lot of science even before you get to orbit. And one of the best ways of getting data from biomes is getting into orbit and then doing EVA reports while in orbit from all the different biomes. This is one of the best ways to get science. We'll get into that once we actually get into orbit. So I have 25 science. I'm going to unlock through her ability. This will give me access to 909 engine, to landing stones, which are quite useful, and radial mount parachute. So let's grab that. This leaves me with 10. I'll just save that. Possibly for advanced rocketry. General construction also isn't bad. And you can also get Science Junior from Science Tech, and this gives you even more science. This is materials bay that you can observe, again, in various different situations. Alright, I think this is enough for the first part. We're going to build something slightly more advanced, perhaps, or we are actually going to get into orbit in the next part. So, I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you next time.